Good day, everyone. I am Andrea B. Munsad, your discussant for today's lecture. And our topic for today is all about Care and Justice by Liz Jackson. Is it more just to act based on compassionate care or on the logical application of ethical principles? And which should be taught to young people in a society? Contemporary debates over issues related to care and justice in philosophy of education are rooted in the continuous examinations of the roles of emotion and personal relationships in moral reasoning in the Western thought. The prioritization and positioning of care versus justice in activities of reasoning and relating to others have significant implications for moral educations and related fields such as civic, social, religious, and emotional education, as well as for development of educational policy. Therefore, educators and ethicists have deliberated on care and justice at length in Western philosophy as well as in Eastern and other international traditions. Philosophical precursors, justice, benevolence, and passion. Although some educational scholars emphasize the place of cold logical rationalism in Western philosophy, the roles of emotions and relations in moral reasoning have continuously been considered and analyzed as complex by Western theorists. In one sense, the history of Western ethics is one of the delineating human behavior that is based inappropriately on passionate whims, irrational impulses, and undue self-interest from a more generalizable and educated guide to acting morally in society. Excuse me. Stoicism is one of the earliest traditions known for a concern with resisting action based on passions, emotional responses and impulses, or personal attachments or fears. However, the Stoics did observe the value of experiencing good feelings, such as warmth toward others, and they gave a role of emotions, if a limited one, in relation to appropriate rational judgment. Plato and Aristotle considered the roles of justice and benevolence in individual behavior within an approach that is now known as virtue ethics. In their writings and in contemporary virtue ethics, benevolence and justice both are considered virtues. The manner in which one acts in accordance with their scholar stipulations how to be appropriately just, benevolent, caring, compassionate, fair is through applying promises, practical wisdom, promises and practical wisdom. Okay, wait. Promises and practical wisdom of compassion and kindness somewhat de-emphasized in relation to justice. As promises is separated from practical skills in developing the independent or autonomous capacity for moral judgment. For you, the place of benevolence versus justice in ethics was also debated in the Enlightenment era by thinkers such as David Hume and Immanuel Kant, who both identified how these virtues or moral principles could operate in tandem or be in conflict. For Hume, benevolence was regarded as more natural than justice as a virtue, and he allowed the justice might be suspended by mercy in times of emergency. Goodwill and justice took priority over benevolence in much of Kant's writing, and Kant grappled continuously with the relationship between feelings and reason within a just society. Excuse me. In his early writings, Kant was clearly influenced by sentimentalist approaches, including Hume's, and articulated how a kind of moral feeling was at the base of morality. He argued in relation that people should observe the situations of those who are disadvantaged around them in order to appropriately develop their orientations toward justice. However, in much of Kant's later work, he emphasized the dangers of being overly driven by sympathetic or benevolent feelings, even by what might otherwise indeed the appropriate moral feelings or senses, rather than what he identified as universalizable reason, which he ultimately saw as the proper foundation for moral feelings. Kant's work on different formulations of the categorical imperative principles to guide behavior, which are justified only as they can be applied universally to all situations, according to the first imperative, became exemplary of deontology. As his imperatives were derived from logical analysis, apparently unswayed by emotions or relations, in order to determine what justice demands. Among Kant's formulations is that one should never use another as means to achieve his or her own ends, but always treat others as ends in themselves. While this hardly excludes the possibility of care, this claim has a controversial legacy today due to its individualistic approach and basis in rationally derived duty, analysis of the roles of relational feelings as helpful or detrimental for conceiving best actions and procedures of decision making for enhancing social justice have developed further in recent years. Contemporary analysis of care and justice in ethics and education. Liberal framings. Given Kant's influence particularly in the areas of deontological ethics and liberal political theory, Kant or Kantianism is frequently interpreted as emphasizing rationally over emotion and individualizing ethics to the neglect of appreciating the roles of community or relationality. Kant's own writings are complex on these issues, as discussed above. However, a tendency toward rationalism and individualism is clear in much contemporary liberal theory, particularly John Rawls' political liberalism. This work laid out another well-known approach to devising ethical principles in a liberal society without relying on rela- feelings relation, which apparently aim to adapt Kantian deontological ethics to the context of the diverse modern nation-state. Under what Rawls termed the original position, a person attempts to devise principles of welfare, order, and justice in society while wearing a veil of ignorance, which entails being ignorant of one's own position in society in relation to other people and to its laws and principles. Similarly, framings concerns with the role of care in human relationships and in the public sphere in terms of duty. Thomas Nagel articulated and defended benevolence in moral life in terms of pure rational altruism, which he regarded as a rational requirement to altruistic duty lacking emotional motivations such as benevolence, sympathy, love, or even generalized affection for the human race. Inspired especially by Kant as Rawls also was in this writing, Nagel emphasized in justifying his work the risk of sentimentality in valuing care and affection for others relationally, over duties toward regarding people as ends in themselves and otherwise aiming to deliberately enhance the positive functioning of society overall. There are many significant implications for philosophy of education in relation to such approaches, but of particular relevance to this lecture is that they imply the ethics and justice are not matters of interpersonal relations or attachments, but are ideally developed when seeing people as appropriately self-interested, reasonable individuals operating autonomously within a public sphere. As Rawls writes in elaborating his view, feelings should not be reasons in matters of basic justice. Well, what he identified and promoted as political virtues and conceptions must be distinguished from the virtues appropriate to roles in family life and to the relations between individuals. Such principles are such principles as are derived from neutrality and impartiality with regard to persons personal feelings and relations are those that Rawls claimed should also specifically guide young people's moral education. According to Justice as Furness, these claims depart from Kant's skepticism of the state of mainstream society's role in developing young people's conceptions of ethics and reason. Outside political philosophy, psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg drew an account elaborating Rawlsian points as a description of the ideally decreasing role of emotion in the development of human moral reasoning. Posing basic impulses of fear and self-interest, or his level 1, and a focus on relationships, level 2, as linear developmental precursors to young people's development of rational, universal ethical principles, or level 3. This notion of natural ethical development stages became highly influential in thinking about moral development in education. A normative implication of this model was that impartial rationality is ideal, and that educators and others should therefore make use of interaction and the environment to scaffold or guide youth through these steps. However, although Kohlberg referenced observational studies and cognition in drawing his claims, influenced by Jean Piaget's work on cognitive development, empirical justifications for them from his own or from other psychological studies have been quite limited. These views have met with various criticism which will be examined in depth in the next lecture. However, this thread of ethical and educational thought remains prominent and continues to see significant development in philosophy of education. In particular, Yaman Kalan defends distinguishing and prioritizing rationality in matters of social justice over emergent alternative approaches that emphasize relational care, offering another liberal, individual-based view in creating citizens. In this text, Callan first discusses a case where a wife wants to learn to read, and her husband initially forbids her, but finally accepts her wish. Callan suggests her that whether the husband's decisions is related to love or his wife's rights should make a difference in evaluating the case morally. As a fundamental part of our self-conception is a worth we possess that does not depend on affection of others. He then interchanges this story with one of a slave's requests of freedom from a slaveholder to articulate that a priori rights and duties to protect them should come before caring in social justice, as to be freed out of love without remain degrading. Callan's work notably echoes Kantian concerns here, with regarding people as ends as themselves as a foundational ethical requirement over other values such as emotional care. In some normative and descriptive cases have been drawn historical and contemporary liberal frameworks to articulate matters of ethics and justice as separate from and limited by concerns with interpersonal and relational caring and feelings. By implication, education should be about political and rational principles and attitudes rather than emotional or relational conceptions. The educational goals would be to enhance the students as ideally impartial, autonomous, rational agents who apply objective principles and to otherwise frame educational policy with reference to such universalizable political conceptions of justice. For more on this, sorry, the next the next lecture considers in detail critiques of such frameworks and alternatively develop recent views that give a greater role to emotion, affection, and relationality in what are sometimes known as care theories in conceiving of social justice and ethics in education. Care theories. Recently, ethicists and educational theories have posed alternative accounts of traditional interpretations and conceptions within Western thinking about the relationship between justice and care. Relatedly, emergent theoretical framings of the relationship between justice and caring that markedly expand the role of care and have influenced contemporary educational theory and practice in significant ways. To start with the former thread, Lawrence Blum and Martha Nussbaum read notably Kant differently from thinkers like Rawls and Nagel, and Blum responds directly to Nagel and his understanding of Kant. To give a more significant place to feeling and interpersonal care in his ethical theorizing and conceiving of justice, while conceding that perhaps he was exaggerated in his concern regarding dramatic and intense feeling for its own sake. Nussbaum has also defended the normative account of social justice offered by Stoicism, arguing Stoicism. I'm sorry. Arguing, as Joel Copperman also has, that most interpretations of the philosophy are overly stony, as Stoicism appreciates the place of emotional feelings such as of kindness and warmth towards others in ethical reasoning. Blum and Nussbaum also share an educational interest in identifying a role for emotion and care in conceptualizing the requirements of social justice, as both argue that when a person has positive feelings towards others, of care, concern, and affection, this can lead to benevolence in line with justice. Blum writes a sympathetic, compassionate person is more likely to act to foster the good of others. This is part of what it means to be sympathetic and compassionate. And so far as this involve dispositions to have certain emotions, and these emotions involve a disposition to act for the sake of the other's good. He further argues in explicit contrast with Nagel and contrary to Callan, as discussed previously, that feelings like sympathy enhance a totality of good that is given through altruistic acts regardless of duty or the consequences or lack of such acts. Blum references Kant in relation, recalling how Kant argued that one should learn about the experiences of others and face of a disadvantage in society to develop compassion. Nussbaum similarly defends compassion as a primary motivator of altruism, identifying love and care towards family as indispensable for an adult's ability to do good in the wider world of adult social concern. She also posits as one implication of her view that people should read multicultural literatures in this case to develop their productive sense of human relation, empathy, and compassion. She elaborates that the cultivation of these emotional experiences of the world are among various capabilities she regards as vital. Within a larger framework, she has developed for understanding what justice demands in relation to social policy and welfare. Kathy Hayton has drawn on this work to elaborate compassionate global citizenship education as vital to help students appreciate and work to ameliorate the roots of social injustice rather than merely address their obvious symptoms through such as acts as volunteering. Neil Noddings has also articulated how, from both empirical and normative perspectives, it is intrinsically good to teach young people in ways that cultivate their capacity for happiness, as it links to justice, and as happy people are unlikely to act cruelly rather than with benevolence towards others. Her work developing care theory has also been groundbreaking in philosophy of education. As a substantive alternative account of the role of emotions and relations to ethics and justice, this work began with a text originally titled Caring, a Feminine Approach to Ethics and Moral Education, changed in 2013 to Caring, a Relational Approach to Ethics and Moral Education. In this text, Noddings argues, in contrast to liberal framings, that human relations of care, rather than ideals of individual agency and autonomous reasoning, should be seen as the foundations of justice. Noddings' work on care is partly inspired by Carol Gilligan's feminist critique of Kohlberg's theory of moral development as a descriptive account. According to Gilligan, Kohlberg's theory excludes the experiences of women in moral thinking, which is characterized by care rather than by separation and independence. Picking up this thread, Noddings emphasizes how, in the history of Western thought, ethics has often devalued women's experiences. To justify her view, she observes that ancient Greeks and Stoics modeled virtue and wisdom with reference to warriors, while Kant dismissed women as moral agents in some writings due to the role of love and care in their activities. Against this backdrop, she articulates the relations of care and interdependence are fundamentally important to human development and flourishing despite being overlooked by philosophers. In her terms, the one caring and the cared for play vital roles in a relationship with each other, recognizing and responding to each other reciprocally. For, I sorry. Recognizing and responding to each other reciprocally. Caring requires being attentive, responsive, and respectful in Nodding's view, which thus clearly positions emotion and relation as key to justice before any sense of individual agency, autonomy, and neutral or impartial action. Many major educational implications derive from this perspective that contrasts with those guided by the liberal framings. First, people should learn to care for each other in education because caring relations at home are foundational to living a good life. This would warrant changes to most contemporary curriculum which give a fairly limited role given to emotional life of students. Relatedly, schools should be caring places as institutions where educators are seen as responsible not just for teaching content but also for caring for and developing caring relations with and alongside students. This means educators should attend to young people's needs, emotional, psychological, and physical, as well as intellectual in schools. Though nothing signals that the caring interpersonal one-on-one relation should primarily undergird ethical thought, which echoes in Nussbaum's work, which also argues that compassion begins with direct relations. Before branching cross-culturally, Noddings also suggests that caring about justice, caring about distant others around the world may be the foundation of justice. In an era when educators have become increasingly concerned with the role of emotions and positive relationships in education, Nodding's relational care approach has been influential within and outside philosophy of educators. Related to such criticisms, such notions of care as generally good as described by work like that of Noddings and related ideas within Nussbaum's capabilities approach have been problematized for their distinctive Western cultural orientations with some thinkers questioning the relevance or resemblance I'm sorry, of the theories to the norms of emotional expressions and appropriate social relations in other cultures and parts of the world. These criticisms reintroduce the question of universalizability of any foundational approach to conceptualizing justice, whether from virtue ethics, deontology, or relational accounts. The next section turns to international, non-Western views related to justice and care in education. Non-Western views. Is it not possible to explore fully all of the major international and non-Western views of care, justice, and education in the space of this lecture? However, some noteworthy recent work has considered convergences and points of contrast across major Western and non-Western threads. In this lecture begins with examining some of the work undertaken to identify relevant Eastern and Western ethical connections before discussing other noteworthy and Western trends. East-West connections. Among Eastern traditions of thought, Confucianism, which continues to have relevance in many Chinese cultures, particularly in East Asia today, focuses on relationships as key to justice, in parallel with care theory approaches, though sometimes known for their focus on hierarchy, and now with Chinese society's possible overuse of social networks, guanxi in decision making. Confucian approaches to ethics share with virtue ethics a concern with situational analysis, dialogue, context, and evaluation of various significant values in making independent, autonomous judgments about what is the right. Articulations of the importance of rationality and critical thinking can be found in works by Confucius and Mencius that focus on moderation in line with contemporary virtue ethics approaches. Criticality toward blindly accepting universal conceptions or principles put down by governments institutions is also defended in some Confucian texts, which emphasize relationships stemming from family to community as more significant than abstract rules or social contracts in serving justice. One possible departure of Nodding's work on relation from Confucianism regards the latter's well-known focus on filial piety, also valued in Chinese Buddhism. Sorry. Filial piety emphasizes youth roles in caring for and respecting elders, which noddings indicates the reciprocity of the cared for and the one caring, in contrast to there being no role or agency of the cared for. However, this may be different emphasis rather than contradictory approaches, as piety seems to assume care on the part it's filial piety. I mean seems to assume care on the part of parents and elders. It is not, as is sometimes assumed, a matter of universal law or blind obedience to practice filial piety according to Confucianism, but rather it should be seen as a virtue or value to be considered within a situation. Furthermore, while nodding care requires attentiveness, responsiveness, and respect, filial piety and and filial piety and guanxi ideally incorporates critically reckoning with relations and context in the first instance. Thus, Thus, the value of filial piety and related concepts such as guanxi and Confucianism seems complementary to care approaches, as relationships of people to each other are held as foundational in both for guiding ethical social practice. On the other hand, the emphasis on decreasing attachments and strong passions and desires for others in relations is shared cross-culturally in the philosophies of Stoicism and Buddhism. Buddhists are known for the aim of releasing one's desire for material goods and personal affection in a way of life that emphasizes balance and a holistic sense of oneness with the metaphysical world. Copperman relates the two philosophies explicitly in considering ideal conceptualization and practice of altruism. He argues that neither Buddhism nor Stoicism are stony, cold philosophies as they are sometimes portrayed. According to Copperman, both approaches encourage and promote what he described as a limited, partly emotional altruism. As he relates, apatheia, I'm sorry, as he relates apatheia with spiritual peace and well-being to Buddhist discussion of the joy of quietness. Echoing with Nussbaum, Copperman identifies emotional care and attachments as inevitable good parts of life, and sees them being incorporated appropriately into the epistemologies, ontologies, and methods of deriving goodness and justice of Stoics and Buddhists. Peter Roberts also finds much resonance between Western works and Eastern philosophical traditions, particularly Taoism and Buddhism. In Happiness, Hope, and Despair, he observes parallels lessons on emotion, moral reason, and educational within Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, the Greek classic, the Oresteia, and the philosophy of Simone Weil. As he notes, all three consider pain, pleasure, and desire as significant in education. Regarding education as moral or spiritual cultivation rather than just basic curriculum. In each strand of thought, Roberts finds an emphasis on striving for focus and attention and enlightenment that is born out of experiencing pain, loss, and joy, and learning to appreciate the significance of the world, of people and things in relation to oneself. Cultivating peacefulness through experiencing the world around oneself and better understanding and appreciating one's relatedness to the world and others is thus seen as key across these traditions. As opposed to busying oneself with rather more small-minded wants and desires. One thinkers have considered how caring and moral feelings and affects are shared of or contrast across educational contexts of East and West. So, Young Kong has explored care theory comparatively across cultural categories of white, black, and Korean. In her analysis, she recommends that educators practice a multicultural form of care theory that recognizes and appreciates significant differences in expressions and relations of care across cultural communities, viewing their understanding of care as a significantly different in everyday practice. Furthermore, she argues that intersectional identity markers should be considered of race, class, gender, and more, as care may look different based on gender relations in Korean culture, in her view. When it when it comes to developing caring relations in educational settings, such comparisons of East-West reveal diversity within cultures as well as similarities across cultures and the need for non nuance in applying care and relational approaches as an educator. Other non-Western views. Amartya Sen observes in comparing Western liberalism with Chinese political theories how both struggle with such issues as private versus public relations and the source of ethical authority as individual, community, or politically or nationally based. Embedded in this debate is grappling over issues including the role of care and emotion in reasoning and decision making. A similar analysis might be undertaken with religious traditions such as Islam and Christianity, which would reveal the ways that throughout their histories, leading thinkers in each tradition pondered over emotional and familial attachment versus rationality and individualism in guiding behavior and creating conditions for justice. For instance, early Christianity history features much wrestling with the appropriate place of marriage and love for a good Christian, as personal attachments were often seen as dangerous distractions from leading a Christian life, as they often are seen today in Buddhism. Another increasingly well-known non-Western approach to social life is the Southern African philosophy of Ubuntu, which is known today for its principle of human interrelatedness as foundational to justice. Like Guanxi, it is being critically reconsidered by some in Southern African societies today, as it has been seen to enable over-reliance on clannishness, tribalism, and nepotism in some cases. Yet its primary emphasis on the oneness and interdependency of humanity has gained global attention recently. After U.S. Department of State Representative Elizabeth Bagley introduced the notion of Ubuntu diplomacy, which she argued bridge Hillary Clinton's "It takes a village to raise a child," with Desmond Tutu's statement that Ubuntu is not "I think, therefore I am." It says rather, "I am human because I belong," often framed as a person is a person through other people. Relations of people to each other are primary in Ubuntu philosophy. In addition, it is often held that Ubuntu reflects a communitarian spirit of Southern Africa, in contrast to an individualistic, liberal attitude in relation to social justice. Arguments regarding how relations of care within communities may be key to justice can also be found in Native American philosophy and in much other indigenous thought around the world. Exploring foundations and contemporary developments in these and other strands of international philosophies can contribute to new understanding of how care and justice are conceived and we can save the world over. Conclusion. Looking forward. The role of care in justice has been explored and debated across philosophical traditions for many centuries, and it is likely that it will be continuously explored in the future. As this debate pertains to the proper way of moral reasoning and ethical decision making, it is undoubtedly important for educational policy as well as curriculum in numerous ways. For instance, what social, non content based service and skills schools should provide students, whether and how to organize international educational exchanges and service learning trips, how to treat different students and young people at interpersonal and institutional levels, and what it means to be a global citizen or to educate for sustainable development in the future are all issues which must be decided and reformed continually in various contexts with attention to whether or not and to what extent relations of care versus individual rights and autonomous judgments are cherished. Thank you. Thank you. And that's all for today. And that's all for today's discussion. Thank you, guys.